Did you know that along the equator there are regions where gravity is slightly weaker than in the rest of the planet due to the Earth's true shape? That several territories crossed by this line sit on unstable tectonic blocks, where rainforests, volcanoes, and active fault lines converge within a surprisingly narrow zone. And that in countries crossed by the equator, there are areas where rivers flow in opposite directions just a few kilometers apart, marking almost invisible natural divides. The equator is not just an imaginary line, it's a belt where the planet's geography behaves differently from almost anywhere else on Earth. Today you'll discover 35 geographical facts about the territories crossed by the equator that will completely change how you understand this line that divides the Earth. 35. Where the Andes meet the equator, Ecuador's high altitude paradox. In Ecuador, the equator slices directly across the Andes Mountains, creating one of the most dramatic geographical contradictions on Earth. Snow-capped peaks and glaciers existing almost exactly on the planet's midpoint. Volcanoes like Cayambe, whose summit glacier lies precisely on the equator, challenge the common idea that equatorial regions are always hot and flat. Altitude here completely reshapes climate. While the equator usually means intense solar radiation and warmth, elevations above 4,000 meters experience freezing temperatures year-round. This collision between latitude and altitude produces extreme vertical climate zones packed into very short distances, from tropical rainforests to alpine tundra. It is one of the clearest examples of how the equator does not dictate climate alone. Relief and elevation can override latitude entirely. 34. A river system larger than continents, Brazil and the Equatorial Amazon. Brazil hosts the largest portion of the Amazon basin, much of it straddling the equator, and this positioning is key to why the system is so vast and powerful. Near the equator, intense solar heating drives constant evaporation, fueling persistent rainfall that feeds thousands of tributaries. The Amazon River discharges more fresh water into the Atlantic Ocean than the next several largest rivers combined, subtly lowering ocean salinity far from the coast. The equator's stable day length and lack of true seasons allow vegetation to grow year-round, reinforcing a self-sustaining hydrological cycle. In this region, geography, climate, and the equator work together to create the largest rainforest and river system on Earth. Before continuing, be sure to subscribe and leave a like to keep discovering the strange and incredible geography of our entire world. 33. Two hemispheres, one country, Indonesia's fragmented equatorial geography. Indonesia is the only country whose territory is spread so evenly across both hemispheres along the equator, and its geography reflects this fragmentation. The equator cuts through islands like Sumatra, Borneo, and Sulawesi, placing cities and rainforests simultaneously north and south of the global midpoint. Because Indonesia sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, equatorial heat combines with tectonic activity to fuel dense jungles, frequent rainfall, and highly fertile volcanic soils. The result is one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet. The equator doesn't just pass through Indonesia, it amplifies its role as a biological and geological crossroads between Asia and Oceania. 32. Equatorial highlands, Kenya's unexpected cool zones. In Kenya, the equator crosses elevated plateaus and volcanic highlands rather than lowland jungle, producing climates that feel surprisingly mild for an equatorial country. Cities near the equator experience warm days and cool nights instead of constant tropical heat. Mount Kenya, Africa's second highest peak, rises just south of the equator and supports glaciers despite intense solar exposure. This unusual combination is possible because altitude offsets latitude. The equator here highlights how vertical geography shapes human settlement, agriculture, and ecosystems, allowing tea farms and temperate forests to exist where many would expect only savanna or rainforest. 31. The Congo Basin's green engine, Democratic Republic of the Congo. The equator cuts straight through the heart of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, anchoring one of the world's largest continuous rainforest systems. Unlike seasonal forests elsewhere, equatorial positioning ensures nearly constant rainfall and minimal temperature variation. The Congo River crosses the equator twice, forming a massive loop that drains an enormous basin. This region plays a crucial role in global carbon storage and climate regulation. The stability provided by the equator allows ecosystems to evolve uninterrupted, resulting in extraordinary biodiversity and dense forest cover that rivals the Amazon in ecological importance. 30. A coastline on the equator, Gabon's Atlantic interface. Gabon is one of the rare countries where the equator passes through both dense rainforest and directly into the Atlantic Ocean. This coastal equatorial position shapes marine and terrestrial ecosystems simultaneously. Warm ocean waters meet heavy rainfall from inland forests, creating mangroves, lagoons, and nutrient-rich coastal waters. Gabon's equatorial forests extend almost unbroken to the sea, a geographical rarity. The equator here influences ocean currents, rainfall patterns, and wildlife distribution, making Gabon one of the most pristine and least fragmented equatorial environments in Africa. 29. Where two rainforests nearly touch, Colombia's equatorial transition zone. In Colombia, the equator grazes the southern part of the country, linking the Amazon rainforest to the Andean mountain system. This creates one of the most complex ecological transition zones on Earth. Moist air rising from the Amazon collides with mountain slopes, generating intense rainfall and cloud forests. Colombia's equatorial regions support staggering biodiversity due to this overlap of ecosystems. The equator here is not a single line, but a blending zone, where lowland jungle, highland forests, and river systems interact in a tightly compressed geographical space. 28. An island nation split by the planet Kiribati's global geography. Kiribati is one of the few countries that the equator crosses almost entirely over ocean territory rather than land. Spread across millions of square kilometers of the Pacific, its islands sit in both hemispheres and across multiple time zones. The equator's position contributes to stable temperatures but also exposes Kiribati to rising sea levels and climate vulnerability. With little elevation and direct equatorial sun, even minor changes in ocean temperature or sea level have outsized effects. Kiribati shows how equatorial geography can be more maritime than continental, redefining what equatorial territory means. 27. Volcanic equator, Sao Tome and Principe's oceanic peaks. Sao Tome and Principe lie almost exactly on the equator in the Gulf of Guinea, rising steeply from the Atlantic as volcanic islands. Their equatorial position ensures high humidity and frequent rainfall, especially on windward slopes. The island's rugged terrain forces moist equatorial air upward, producing lush rainforests and dramatic microclimates over very short distances. This combination of equatorial sun and volcanic geology has created isolated ecosystems with high levels of endemism. Here, the equator enhances isolation rather than connectivity, shaping unique island landscapes. 26. A river that mirrors the sun, the Republic of the Congo's equatorial waterways. In the Republic of the Congo, the equator aligns closely with major river systems feeding the Congo basin. These rivers experience relatively stable flow year-round because equatorial rainfall lacks strong seasonal extremes. Sun angles remain high throughout the year, maximizing evaporation and convection, which continuously recycles moisture back into the atmosphere. The result is a near-constant rhythm of rainfall and river discharge. This geographical balance illustrates one of the equator's most powerful effects, creating stability rather than extremes, allowing ecosystems and human activities to adapt to a predictable environmental cycle. 25. Where the equator meets the Atlantic, Brazil's ocean rainforest connection. In northern Brazil, the equator does not stop at the edge of the continent. It continues directly into the Atlantic Ocean, creating one of the most important land-sea interfaces on Earth. By the time equatorial air masses reach the Brazilian coast, they have already absorbed enormous amounts of moisture from the Amazon rainforest. When this moisture-laden air meets warm equatorial ocean waters, it fuels powerful atmospheric convection that affects weather patterns far beyond South America. The Amazon River, which empties into the Atlantic just north of the equator, plays a crucial role in this system. Its freshwater plume stretches hundreds of kilometers into the ocean, reducing salinity and altering marine ecosystems across a vast area. This interaction between equatorial rivers and equatorial oceans helps regulate global circulation patterns, influencing trade winds and even rainfall in distant regions. Brazil's equatorial coastline shows that the equator is not simply a line on land, but a continuous planetary system linking rainforest, river, atmosphere, and ocean. 24. When shadows almost disappear, the equatorial sun over Colombia. In equatorial Colombia, the position of the sun behaves in ways that feel almost unnatural to visitors from higher latitudes. Twice a year during the equinoxes, the sun passes nearly relatively directly overhead at solar noon. At that moment, vertical objects cast little to no shadow, a visual reminder that this region lies near the Earth's rotational midpoint. This phenomenon is not just symbolic, it has tangible geographical consequences. The near vertical angle of sunlight delivers intense and efficient solar energy to the surface, accelerating evaporation from forests, rivers, and soils. This energy feeds the formation of towering cloud systems that release heavy rainfall, especially along the Andean foothills. Colombia's equatorial position therefore amplifies the interaction between solar radiation and mountainous terrain, producing some of the wettest and most biologically productive regions in the Americas. Here, the equator directly shapes how energy enters the landscape and how that energy is transformed into climate and life. 23. Ice on the equator, Mount Kenya's vertical worlds. Mount Kenya rises just south of the equator, yet its summit reaches into permanently cold conditions, supporting glaciers and alpine ice fields. This creates one of the clearest demonstrations on Earth that latitude alone does not define climate. At the base of the mountain, equatorial heat supports tropical forests and rich agricultural land. As elevation increases, temperatures drop rapidly, producing bamboo zones, heathlands, and finally alpine environments near the peak. The equator intensifies this contrast. Because lower elevations experience consistent warmth year-round, biological activity remains high, while the summit exists in a completely different climatic regime. This extreme vertical zoning compressed into a relatively small horizontal distance makes Mount Kenya a geographical laboratory. It illustrates how equatorial regions can host some of the planet's most dramatic environmental gradients, all driven by the interaction between latitude and altitude. 22. A river that refuses seasons, the Congo River's double crossing. The Congo River is unique among the world's great rivers because it crosses the equator twice along its course. This looping path keeps much of the river system permanently within the equatorial rainfall belt. As a result, the Congo experiences far less seasonal variation in water levels compared to rivers dependent on monsoons or snowmelt. Rain falls consistently throughout the year across its vast basin. This stability has shaped both the physical geography and human history of Central Africa. Dense rainforests thrive along the riverbanks, and ecosystems have evolved without the stress of extreme dry seasons. The equator's influence ensures that the Congo River operates as a continuous, steady system rather than a seasonal one. It is a powerful example of how equatorial positioning can create predictability in an otherwise dynamic natural world. 21. Indonesia's daily weather clock, life under an equatorial sky. In equatorial Indonesia, weather follows a rhythm so consistent it can feel like a natural clock. Clear mornings give way to rapidly rising clouds by midday, followed by intense afternoon or evening rainfall. This pattern is driven by the equator's constant solar input, which heats the surface evenly throughout the year. Warm air rises almost daily, triggering convection and storms. Surrounded by warm seas, Indonesia's islands amplify this process. Moisture evaporates quickly from ocean surfaces, feeding clouds that release rain over land. Over time, this relentless cycle has carved steep valleys, nourished dense rainforests, and supported extraordinary biodiversity. Indonesia shows how the equator doesn't just affect climate averages, it structures daily life, shaping landscapes hour by hour rather than season by season. 20. An unbroken green belt, Gabon's equatorial interior. Gabon sits astride the equator with much of its interior still covered by continuous rainforest. Unlike many equatorial regions fragmented by agriculture or urban expansion, Gabon's forests stretch across broad plateaus with relatively gentle relief. The equator ensures stable temperatures and abundant rainfall, reducing environmental stress and allowing ecosystems to mature over long periods. This stability has resulted in forests with complex structures, long-lived tree species, and rich wildlife populations. From a geographical perspective, Gabon represents a near-ideal expression of equatorial conditions. Consistent solar energy, reliable moisture, and minimal seasonal disruption. It offers a glimpse into what equatorial landscapes looked like before large-scale human modification elsewhere. 19. One rainforest, two hemispheres, Ecuador's Amazonian edge. Eastern Ecuador lies directly on the equator within the western Amazon basin, placing its rainforest simultaneously in the northern and southern hemispheres. This positioning produces remarkably stable environmental conditions. Day length varies little, temperatures remain consistent, and biological processes operate continuously throughout the year. Because the equator minimizes seasonal stress, species can specialize intensely, leading to extraordinary biodiversity within relatively small areas. Rivers flow steadily, forests regenerate rapidly, and ecological interactions remain active year-round. Ecuador's Equatorial Amazon demonstrates how the equator compresses ecological intensity, creating landscapes where life operates at maximum efficiency. 18. The equator beneath the waves. Pacific currents around Kiribati. Around Kiribati, the equator passes almost entirely over open ocean, influencing marine systems more than landforms. Equatorial currents, driven by trade winds and Earth's rotation, move warm surface waters across the Pacific. These currents shape nutrient distribution, fish migration routes, and even global climate patterns such as El Niño and La Niña. Although Kiribati's islands are small and low-lying, their equatorial position places them at the heart of these oceanic processes. The equator here is invisible but powerful, governing the movement of heat and life across vast distances. Kiribati illustrates that equatorial geography can be predominantly marine, yet no less significant. 17. No summer, no winter, Sao Tome's equatorial time. On Sao Tome, the concept of seasons as defined in temperate regions simply does not apply. Temperatures remain nearly constant throughout the year due to the island's equatorial location. Instead of summer and winter, the main variation comes from changes in rainfall intensity influenced by winds and topography. Moist equatorial air rises against volcanic slopes, producing heavy localized rainfall that feeds dense forests and deep valleys. This creates sharp microclimates over very short distances. Sao Tome's geography shows how the equator eliminates temperature seasons entirely, replacing them with a climate governed almost exclusively by moisture and terrain. 16. Forests, savannas, and lakes. Uganda's equatorial mosaic. In Uganda, the equator passes through a landscape shaped as much by elevation and water as by latitude. Large lakes, including Lake Victoria, lie close to the equator and act as thermal regulators, moderating temperatures and redistributing moisture. Surrounding highlands and plateaus create a patchwork of forests, wetlands, and savannas. Rather than producing a uniform environment, the equator amplifies Uganda's geographical diversity. Small changes in elevation or proximity to water result in distinct ecosystems existing side by side. Uganda demonstrates that equatorial regions are not monotonous. They are often among the most varied landscapes on Earth. 15. Where two great forests almost meet, Colombia at the equatorial crossroads. Southern Colombia sits near the equator at one of the most complex geographical intersections on the planet. Here, the Amazon rainforest pushes northward, while the Andes Mountains descend into lowland jungle, creating a compressed transition zone unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. The equator intensifies this interaction by delivering constant solar energy, which fuels evaporation, cloud formation, and heavy rainfall across both systems simultaneously. As warm, moisture-laden air rises from the Amazon basin, it collides with the eastern slopes of the Andes, producing persistent rain and dense cloud forests. These conditions allow ecosystems to stack vertically and horizontally in very short distances. In a matter of kilometers, landscapes shift from tropical rainforest to montane forest to high-altitude paramo. Colombia's equatorial position does not create a single dominant environment. Instead, it acts as an amplifier, increasing ecological overlap and biodiversity. This is one reason Colombia ranks among the most biologically diverse countries on Earth despite its relatively compact size. 14. A capital near the middle of the world. Quito's equatorial elevation. Quito, the capital of Ecuador, lies just south of the equator at an elevation of nearly 2,850 meters above sea level. This combination of equatorial latitude and high altitude produces a climate that defies expectations. Daytime temperatures remain mild year-round, while nights are cool, and seasonal variation is minimal. The equator provides consistent solar input, but elevation moderates its effects. From a geographical perspective, Quito demonstrates how human settlements adapt to equatorial conditions by leveraging topography. The city sits within a narrow Andean valley shaped by volcanic activity, surrounded by steep slopes that influence wind, rainfall, and temperature distribution. Despite being almost exactly on the equator, Quito avoids the oppressive heat associated with many equatorial cities. Its location highlights a recurring theme in equatorial geography. Latitude sets the baseline, but relief defines the lived experience. Treton, Indonesia's broken equator, thousands of islands, one climate engine. The equator cuts through the heart of Indonesia, but instead of crossing a single landmass, it weaves through thousands of islands spread across Southeast Asia. This fragmented geography dramatically amplifies equatorial processes. Warm seas dominate the landscape, absorbing solar energy during the day and releasing it slowly at night, stabilizing temperatures and fueling constant atmospheric convection. Because land and sea are so tightly interwoven, Indonesia experiences some of the most intense rainfall on Earth. Moist air rises quickly to overheated islands, forming daily storm systems that reset the climate almost every 24 hours. Over geological time, this relentless cycle has sculpted steep volcanic landscapes, fed dense rainforests, and supported extraordinary biological diversity. Indonesia's equatorial position does not simply influence climate, it turns the entire archipelago into a single interconnected climate engine. 12. The equator through the heart of Africa, DR Congo's climatic core. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the equator runs directly through the center of the country, anchoring one of the largest continuous equatorial regions on Earth. This central position places much of the country permanently within the zone of rising warm air, known as the Intertropical Convergence Zone. As a result, rainfall is frequent and temperatures remain remarkably stable throughout the year. This climatic consistency has allowed the Congo Basin rainforest to develop uninterrupted over immense timescales. Rivers, soils, and ecosystems operate without the shock of prolonged dry seasons. The equator here functions as a stabilizing force, creating environmental predictability that shapes everything from forest structure to human livelihoods. Few regions illustrate the equator's role as clearly as the Central Congo, where latitude governs the rhythm of the entire landscape. 11. When the equator crosses open sea, the Atlantic between Africa and South America. Between Africa and South America, the equator stretches across the Atlantic Ocean, forming a critical zone in global ocean circulation. Here, intense solar heating warms surface waters, driving evaporation and feeding atmospheric convection. These equatorial waters help power trade winds and influence weather systems across multiple continents. The equator also marks a transition zone between northern and southern ocean currents. Subtle differences in temperature and salinity shape marine ecosystems and influence the distribution of fish species. Although invisible, this equatorial marine belt plays a major role in regulating Earth's climate. It reminds us that the equator is not confined to land. It is equally powerful over open water, where it shapes planetary scale systems. Remember to subscribe and like to keep learning amazing facts about every part of our incredible world. 10. A line that shapes rivers, Ecuador's Pacific watersheds. In western Ecuador, the equator influences how rivers form, flow, and interact with the Pacific Ocean. Short, steep rivers descend rapidly from the Andes toward the coast, fed by heavy equatorial rainfall. Because there is little seasonal variation in precipitation, these rivers flow year-round, transporting sediments and nutrients directly into coastal ecosystems. This constant discharge supports mangroves, estuaries, and productive fisheries along Ecuador's Pacific coast. The equator ensures that water cycles remain active without interruption, reinforcing the link between mountains, rivers, and ocean. Ecuador's geography shows how even small equatorial countries can host highly dynamic systems where latitude, relief, and hydrology intersect. 9. Kenya's equator on the move, high plateaus, and climate balance. As the equator crosses Kenya, it passes over elevated plateaus rather than dense rainforest. This elevation dramatically reshapes equatorial conditions. Days are warm but not extreme. Nights are cool, and rainfall is often seasonal rather than constant. The equator here interacts with altitude to produce some of the most livable climates in tropical Africa. This balance has made equatorial Kenya a center for agriculture and human settlement. Crops that would struggle in lowland equatorial heat thrive on these high plains. The region demonstrates that the or does not impose a single climatic outcome. Instead, it interacts with local geography to create a wide range of environments. 8. Islands on both sides of the planet, Kiribati's hemispheric identity. Kiribati's territory straddles the equator across vast stretches of the Pacific Ocean, placing its islands in both hemispheres simultaneously. Unlike continental countries, Kiribati's geography is dominated by open water, low elevation, and direct exposure to equatorial sun and sea level processes. Temperatures remain stable year-round, but the lack of elevation leaves the islands highly sensitive to changes in ocean temperature and sea level. The equator here defines climate stability, but also vulnerability. Kiribati illustrates a rarely discussed side of equatorial geography, where latitude provides consistency, but geography offers little protection. 7. Where volcanoes meet the equator, Sao Tome's vertical tropics. Sao Tome rises sharply from the Atlantic Ocean almost exactly on the equator, forming a steep volcanic island with dramatic elevation changes. Equatorial sunlight heats the surrounding ocean, while moist air is forced upward by the island's rugged terrain. This process creates intense rainfall on windward slopes and dense tropical forests climbing thousands of meters above sea level. Within a small area, Sao Tome contains coastal plains, cloud forests, and cooler highland environments. The equator enhances this vertical complexity by ensuring constant energy input. The island shows how equatorial regions can produce extreme geographical diversity even at very small scales. 6. The equator as a global divider, hemispheres, climate, and perception. At its most fundamental level, the equator divides Earth into the northern and southern hemispheres, but in equatorial regions, this division is more conceptual than practical. Countries like Brazil, Indonesia, and Uganda exist in both hemispheres at once, experiencing nearly identical climatic conditions on either side of the line. This challenges the way humans traditionally think about geography. Seasons, hemispheres, and directional assumptions lose meaning near the equator. Instead, climate is governed by sun angle, rainfall, and local terrain. The equator is not a boundary that separates. It is a zone that blends, stabilizes, and connects vast portions of the planet. 5. A line that creates life, why biodiversity peaks at the equator. One of the most profound geographical realities of the equator is its direct connection to global biodiversity. Across equatorial territories in Brazil, Colombia, Indonesia, and the Congo basin, life reaches levels of complexity and abundance unmatched anywhere else on Earth. This is not coincidence, but the result of long-term geographic stability. Near the equator, temperatures remain warm year-round. Daylight hours vary very little, and ecosystems are spared the biological resets caused by harsh winters or extreme seasonal swings. This stability allows species to specialize rather than adapt defensively. Plants can grow continuously, insects can reproduce year-round, and animals can occupy extremely narrow ecological niches. Over millions of years, this leads to explosive diversification. A single hectare of equatorial rainforest can contain more tree species than entire countries in temperate regions. The equator does not merely support life, it accelerates evolution itself by removing environmental interruptions. In this sense, equatorial geography acts as a biological incubator, continuously generating new forms of life at an unparalleled rate. 4. When mountains defy latitude, snow on the equator. The equator is often imagined as uniformly hot, yet some of its most dramatic landscapes are frozen. In Ecuador and Kenya, the equator crosses massive volcanic and tectonic uplifts that rise high enough to override latitude entirely. On Ecuador's Andean volcanoes and in Mount Kenya, temperatures drop sharply with altitude, allowing glaciers and permanent snowfields to exist almost exactly on the Earth's midline. This creates one of geography's most striking contrasts. Tropical rainforests at the base of mountains and icy peaks above, separated by only a few vertical kilometers. These conditions generate unique hydrological systems, where equatorial glaciers feed rivers that sustain lowland forests and human settlements. The presence of snow on the equator is a reminder that latitude sets the rules, but elevation can rewrite them entirely. Few places on Earth demonstrate the layered complexity of geography as vividly as equatorial mountains. 3. The equator as a climate engine powering the planet's atmosphere. From a planetary perspective, the equator is Earth's primary engine of atmospheric motion. Intense solar heating causes warm air to rise consistently along the equatorial belt, creating low-pressure zones that drive global wind systems. This rising air eventually moves toward higher latitudes before descending, forming circulation cells that influence weather patterns across the entire planet. Countries crossed by the equator sit at the heart of this system. Rainfall in the Amazon, storms in Indonesia, and monsoonal patterns far beyond the tropics are all linked to equatorial energy transfer. Without the equator's constant heat input, global circulation would weaken dramatically, altering climates from Europe to North America. The equator is not just a line on a map, it is the thermal backbone of Earth's climate system, quietly regulating conditions for billions of people who live far from it. 2. One line, two worlds, countries in both hemispheres. Several equatorial countries, including Brazil, Indonesia, and Uganda, exist simultaneously in the northern and southern hemispheres. This geographic reality challenges the way hemispheres are usually understood. In these countries, crossing from one hemisphere to the other may involve little more than stepping across an unmarked line with no noticeable change in climate, vegetation, or daylight. This dual hemisphere existence highlights the artificial nature of many geographic divisions. While hemispheres matter greatly at higher latitudes, near the equator their influence fades. What remains is a unified environmental experience shaped far more by rainfall, elevation, and proximity to oceans than by which side of the planet one occupies. The equator dissolves boundaries rather than enforcing them, reminding us that geography is often more continuous than categorical. 1. The most powerful imaginary line on Earth. The equator is imaginary, yet its effects are profoundly real. It shapes climates, governs ecosystems, directs ocean currents, drives atmospheric circulation, and influences where life thrives most intensely. Across rainforests, mountains, islands, and oceans, the equator acts as a stabilizing force, delivering consistent energy that underpins some of the most complex systems on the planet. What makes the equator unique is not just what it divides, but what it connects. It links continents through climate, oceans through currents, and ecosystems through shared environmental rhythms. The territories it crosses are not defined by extremes of heat alone, but by balance, continuity, and interaction. In the end, the equator is far more than a geographic reference. It is one of the fundamental organizing principles of Earth itself. After learning these 35 facts about the territories crossed by the equator, tell us, which one did you like best, or which one surprised you? Leave your answers in the comments, and let's see how many of us chose the same fact. And speaking of choosing, the best thing you can do is watch the video below. That way you'll become a true geography expert. But before you go, don't forget to subscribe and like so we can keep learning together. See you in the video.